Good day, everyone. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. We're going to focus on streamlining IP address and DNS operations in VMware Cloud and NSX environments. My name is Matt Gawardi. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager with Infoblox. I'm excited to also announce that we have Simon Hamilton-Wilkes, who is a NSX Technical Architect with VMware, who's going to walk through some of the components on a VMware perspective as well today. Before I do begin the presentation, I want to cover a few house cleaning items. Today's call is being recorded, so in case you missed some of this or you want to share with a colleague, you'll be getting a copy of the recorded version within 72 hours after today's webinar. In addition, we'll share a copy of today's presentation so you can keep all the information and see all the links, and you can leverage that after the fact. We will have some time at the end of today's call for Q&A. At the bottom of your ON24 platform, there's a list of different tabs. There's one tab for a Q&A. Just click on that anytime throughout today's presentation. Feel free to type in any questions you may have, and we'll answer as many as possible, time permitting, at the end of the call. If we do miss any of your questions, we will follow up with those afterwards, either with you directly or through a Q&A document, depending on the number of questions we do get today. So what we're going to walk through kind of some of the key things on today's agenda. The first one is, as I mentioned, Simon's going to walk through kind of a VMware NSX overview and capabilities, talk about some of the new and exciting things you can do from an SDN architecture point of view. And then we're going to drill down into more detail on aspects such as some of the common challenges that we see dealing with core network services in these types of environments, talking about the value of automating IP address and DNS provisioning, and how Infoblox can help with that, and also give you an interactive demo. So we'll walk through, kind of show you the interaction of how Infoblox can work with VMware to really help automate and speed some of those provisioning processes across your SDN and your cloud architectures. And then, again, as I mentioned at the end of the call today, have some time for Q&A. Before I turn the call over to Simon, we do have a couple of polling questions throughout today's webinar. My first one I just popped up here, so if you have a chance, please answer this. So the first one, to help Simon understand kind of the audience and where you are today, can you let me know kind of where your organization is when you're deploying NSX architectures within VMware? So are you, have deployed, either widely deployed, maybe partially deployed across some of your organization, maybe you're in a testing phase, maybe you're not there yet, you're considering or evaluating, or maybe you're not considering yet today. We're going to give you a couple of seconds to answer that. As we see here, we see kind of partially deployed along the way, some folks widely deployed, a lot of people kind of considering and evaluating this organization and this way to kind of deploy the services across your organization. So I hope that'll help Simon kind of level set the people on today's call as he walks through some of the key things we're going to talk about with NSX and how VMware can help you from an SDN perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Simon now, who will work through some of the networking models from an NSX perspective.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk about NSX and how NSX is intended to be the network hypervisor the way vSphere is the compute hypervisor. So if I build this slide out a little bit, we can start to explain what we mean by that. So in this sense, NSX is the abstraction layer the way vSphere is the abstraction layer for compute. So in the case of compute, vSphere allows you to run many virtual machines with running independent operating systems on top of one piece of hardware. And then NSX allows the same virtualization of networking on top of hardware. So where you might have VLANs in physical hardware, and you will have ports into physical servers or ESXi hosts, in NSX land, you have this whole extra encapsulation layer and overlay layer, which is running this VXLAN encapsulation, which allows you to have millions of networks on top of those. And this abstraction is tremendously powerful when it comes to multi-tenancy, but also gives you tremendous flexibility for even a single tenant, because suddenly a lot of the provisioning and a lot of the independence between applications and things can become much more dynamic and agile, because instead of having to provision stuff on the physical network, it's all become software. And this is this whole software-defined networking buzzword that has somewhat fallen out of fashion as everybody's moved over to the cloud buzzword now, but the abstraction layer is the key thing here, where we have this extra layer where software is now doing things that used to be in hardware. So on top of this abstraction layer, which is VXLAN, VXWires on top of VLANs, we are also providing services. So on top of those, we've got routing, layer 3 routing between these different VXWires. We've got firewalling between these different VXWires and between individual VMs, which is very key. And then we've also got load balancing and VPN and other frequently used networking services, and we can provide all those via a virtual appliance. The most important ones are the stuff that we've actually added to the hypervisor. So because distributed firewall and distributed routing within the hypervisor kernel, they're very, very fast. So for east-west traffic, which is traffic that's staying within the virtual data center, we've got very, very high throughputs, and it becomes native to the platform, which means it's not having to go out to a virtual appliance, it's not having to go out to a piece of hardware. It's all very, very fast. And then again, all this is dynamically configured because it's all defined in software. And by high throughput rates, we're meaning it scales out with the size of the cluster, but each host can basically do wire speed, so 20 gigabits plus per host, which for firewalling in particular is very, very fast, which means that you can, for the first time, support firewalling between all individual VMs, and you can do this zero trust networking, where NSX puts this distributed firewall effectively on the VNIC of every single VM. And you can go to a zero trust model, which means you're explicitly permitting traffic, but anything that is not permitted is denied, because this is how a firewall works. And that becomes operationally feasible because you have the throughput, and also the way the management works within NSX enables you to define policies based on tags and based on various identifying properties of the virtual machines or the applications, such that you can build these zero trust networks and do this micro-segmentation without having to have security policies which are hundreds of thousands of lines long, which you might have had to in the past, where those policies were defined purely by IP addresses or MAC addresses or other constructs. So here again, we're just showing the virtualization layer, the network storage compute layer. All this is getting us to this utility computing thing, where before private cloud, this was called utility computing, and I spent a lot of time marketing a long gone version of this back in 2009, I think, where it was just ahead of its time. And the idea was you have a pool of resources and you consume those as required. And as you need a new application, you press a button and it spins up. And it was really the precursor to private cloud and also public cloud, where in some instances. And just so much of the intrinsic parts were missing at that point, where in order to spin up an application with automation, you need, or you don't just need to create virtual machines, you need to then provision the applications on those and set up the different services that support those, which might be firewalling, there might be load balancing, there might be IP addresses and DNS. So in order to get all this stuff dynamically provisioned, you needed to have every single part. Because if you didn't have every single part, then all the rest of the automation would go, and you'd deploy this application in minutes or hours instead of days or weeks. But then you'd still be waiting for other components. You'd still be waiting on somebody to do the firewall rules, or you'd still be waiting for DNS entries from the DNS team, or you'd still be waiting for IP addresses to be allocated in an Excel spreadsheet somewhere. And somewhere there would be a hang-up, and this terrific thing you'd spent all this money on and effort creating would be just waiting for the remaining bits that weren't there. So now we're getting to this point where all this stuff can happen at once. So these are all the different components in NSX these days, as I said. The key ones are switching, obviously, routing, which is distributed routing, and there's also routing in the edge appliances. There's load balancing in the edge appliances, connectivity to physical networks, which is both layer 2 bridging, but more frequently layer 3 connectivity, which is the encapsulation and decapsulation from our VXLAN pool of VX wires, which can be literally millions, but somewhere, usually at the edge, we've got to convert those back into VLANs to talk to the physical networks. There's firewalling, and there's two firewalls in NSX, just to be confusing. There's the distributed firewall, which is running in the hypervisor, and then there's also a firewall on the edge, which is more for north-south traffic into and out of the environment. And there's VPN, both point-to-point and also client SSL VPN. And then operations and endpoint monitoring become very important, because so much of this, as you want to automate this stuff, you need to keep the complexity manageable. So operationally, the aim is to automate things and make things consumable in a manageable way. So then over on the left here, we've got these management APIs and user interface. And in many cases, rather than customers doing stuff in the NSX graphical user interface, which is a plug-in to vSphere web client, and you can consume everything there, but it's so much more powerful if you're consuming NSX via a cloud management platform, be it VRA or vCloud Director or some other cloud management platform, because then you can do things in a repeatable manner, you can scale things, and you can re-provision the same applications for different stages of their life cycle and deprovision them at the end of their life cycle too. And you can base all the security policies on groups and tags and different dynamic features rather than on old world IP addresses, MAC addresses, and things like that. So the NSX decks have this 3x3 matrix of different NSX use cases. Microsegmentation in the top middle there has been risen to prominence in many ways, just because it became the sort of killer app for NSX. But we also seeing a lot of sales for disaster recovery and multi-data center and cross-cloud stuff over on the right there. But the key one for this use case with Infoblox is automation. Again, there's a sort of the developer cloud use case where you're repeatedly instantiating the same application over and over again for different developers, or for staging, or for testing, or whatever. And then providing this multi-tenancy, because you've got this abstraction layer, you can ring-fence networks from each other. They can all have the same IP addressing, but not overlap, because NSX is dealing with that. And then IT automation, NSX has these various API layers, so all this stuff can be provisioned from either a cloud management platform or from scripting or from whatever else you want to consume it from. And NSX has a very rich set of APIs. So in addition to the north-south API, which is the API from which you can consume all the different NSX features, there's also a couple of APIs for third-party extensibility that are private APIs. There's one for guest introspection, which is for things like agentless antivirus. And there's another one for network introspection, which is used by a lot of our partners now when they need to get access to the network traffic from the VM before it hits the virtual switch. So if you work with one of our firewall partners for layer 7 firewall inspection, they install a service virtual machine on each host, and then they get to see the traffic before it even reaches the virtual switch if it's steered to them, and that's all automatically done by the API as well. Anyway, so back to the sort of problem at hand, which is where we have all these functions, and it's all great. And we've got on-demand application delivery defined, so we can instantiate a 3-tier app by pressing go on VRA, and VRA can create this app in 15 minutes by creating 7 or 8 VMs and doing all the plumbing in NSX for load balancing and firewalling and routing. And then the constraint frequently becomes IP addressing and DNS. So that's where our partner Infoblox comes in. So let me hand back to Matt.
Sounds great, Simon. Thanks for walking through kind of an overview of what's going on with NSX and some of the key things that VMware is trying to do for software-defined networking or cloud or next-gen data center, software-defined data center 2.0. Pick your favorite term and what you might use, and some of the key automation pieces, and leveraging things like vRealize automation and vRealize orchestration as a way to try to automate some of these processes. But as Simon mentioned, one of the key things we tend to see as some of the challenges is trying to help some of these core network services, things like an IP address and a DNS record, and how do you handle that today? And we're going to walk through some best practices and ways we can help automate some of those procedures across your organization. For my second polling question, again, if you don't mind, please answer this based on your organization. If you start spinning up a new VM or you're doing something via NSX, some of you are on NSX. If you're not on NSX, if you're doing a new virtual machine, for example, what is your process for assigning an IP address today? And there's a couple ways people typically do it. One is maybe I'll do a trouble ticket, and I'll follow my normal trouble ticketing process, and then I'll manually go in, get an IP address, and assign it. Maybe the second one is I try to create a custom script as a way to try to automate some of these key components. A third way is maybe I gave a block of IP addresses, my VM admin, or somebody else on the cloud side who gets a block of addresses they assign as they see fit along the way, or something else. So again, those are kind of the key ones we typically see on assigning IP addresses from an organization. And we see kind of a range here. We see a couple people who have done some custom scripts. The majority either do a trouble ticket and handle it manually, or they give a block of IPs to the VM admin. So those are the two most common we tend to see. So I'm kind of glad to see it's very common along the way for the folks on today's call. And when we see some of the challenges, there's some issues in terms of how the organization is set up that cause some of these headaches that we tend to see. First of all, typically there's silos. I have different teams. My networking team might own DNS and IP addressing. My application or cloud team or my VMware team might handle the virtual components, whether it's a VM or NSX. In addition, I have different point products. I have different processes along the way. Maybe I've built some of those custom scripts as a way to try to integrate these two things together, and also kind of different priorities. A lot of times my VM folks and my cloud folks think very quick, very agile. My networking team likes to think very controlled, very consistent. And those different priorities can also cause some challenges in terms of deployments. And then how do we do it in the processes? So again, for those folks doing trouble tickets, a lot of times you do a trouble ticket as a way to maintain control. I want to know what IP address, I want to know what DNS record I want to deal with, so I start doing a trouble ticket. Well, that gives me control. That tends to add some delays along the process. So how long does it take? When you think about how long does it take from the request comes in when I can actually use that service, how do you measure that? Do you measure it in minutes, hours, days, weeks? For a lot of us, when the trouble ticketing, it's typically days or weeks because of those different gates I have to go through. And that really goes against some of the value that Simon talked about of kind of on-demand, dynamic services, agile services becomes an issue. Or as I asked the other question, do anybody assign IP addresses via spreadsheet, or you allocate an IP address? And a lot of groups will give a server team away some IP addresses as a way to speed the process, but then oftentimes I lose some of that visibility coming in. They tell me what they're using it for, maybe, maybe not. Do I keep track of it? Probably not. They own it. But as a networking team, I typically have to think holistic, and that becomes a challenge on the process. And then also a lot of times we focus so much on the spin up, get things up, get them assigned along the way, and we don't focus on the cleanup. So when I destroy something, do I ever clean up the DNS records? Do I reclaim the IP addresses? Typically, when I talk to folks at conventions like VMworld, they say, no, we don't. We're so busy doing everything else, we don't think about cleanup, and that becomes a major issue in terms of some of the processes. And And then the efficiency. A lot of your teams are overworked already, but now I have these excessive manual processes. Now I have very smart people, very highly trained people, very expensive people doing manual tasks, like assigning an IP address. Not rocket science, but critical. So I have to find a way to make this more effective along the way. In addition, these handoffs add time, so I sit around and wait. While it might be important for me, it might not be important for my networking person at this time. And also a lack of consistency. So if I start spreading it out and start giving IP addresses, let somebody else do more things, now I add consistency issues and risks where things aren't like they should be along the way, and that could also impact availability because now if I have inconsistency, that can cause more problems as well. And the key thing we want to focus on is talking about some of this integration between kind of that virtual and cloud world and those core network requirements. So while you're doing it today, maybe through trouble tickets or through custom scripts or through a spreadsheet, there is a better way to try to handle this and make this more effective across your organization. And that's what Infoblox and VMware is really trying to focus on doing. We're really trying to work with some of these key partners along the way to go out and solve this issue by leveraging Infoblox integration with, for example, VMware VRA or VRO, or your vCloud Director if you're a little bit further back along the way. But I have my service blueprint where I'm doing request, approval, provision, manage, retire, archive. We're building those hooks in, leveraging automation, leveraging the APIs as a way to automate the IP address and DNS host record when I start spinning up or provisioning, as well as when things are destroyed, we'll go back and clean those up after the fact as well. So now I can maintain consistency, I can clean up, I have a consolidated view of what's going on, and that's really the value that we're trying to bring together is have that integrated service delivery. You know, again, as Simon mentioned, one of the biggest headaches is it doesn't matter how fast I can spin up all my NSX or all my storage and compute on a virtual world if I'm still waiting for an IP address or a DNS record, for example. And we're really working with VRA, VRO, all these orchestration tools out there to make it much smoother and easier to give you control, but also automate some of these key processes. Now I have one final polling question just to help me understand kind of where you are today and what you're doing for DNS and IP address management, or what's called IPAM. You know, what tools are you using today in your organization? So I can tailor my rest of my presentation towards what you might be using. In terms of using Infoblox for DNS and IP address management, maybe Microsoft, because it's been there for quite some time. Maybe you're spinning up bind servers along the way. Maybe there's another DDI vendor you purchased over the years, or maybe you don't know. Maybe it's not your responsibility. You don't handle that on your organization. But if you do know, if you could pick kind of one of these key answers. I'll give you one more second here to click on the right button. And we see kind of a mixture here, primarily Infoblox and Microsoft here, maybe one person using another DDI vendor. So the good news is for those of you using Infoblox, a lot of this will make a lot more sense coming up when we talk about the integration that we're leveraging with Infoblox and what we're doing for DNS and IP address management today. For those using Microsoft or something else, I'm going to give you a high-level overview about Infoblox and what we do along the way from a DDI perspective or DNS, DHCP, and IP address management perspective, and then talk a lot more about the integration so I can start spinning up the IP address and the DNS record components across your deployment, across your organization, or your enterprise. And with Infoblox, what we're known for is kind of actual network intelligence for that core network services. So typically, it's, Gartner calls it DDI, but DNS, DHCP, IP address management. Highly available platforms that make sure you have those services up and running. So for those using Microsoft, for example, we can either work with Microsoft or replace Microsoft, again, for high availability, disaster recovery, management, some of these key integrations we're going to talk about. But we also add more capabilities on top of it, including DNS traffic control, which is like load balancing for DNS, advanced DNS protection and secure DNS, very big risk area out there from a DNS perspective on security, as well as some of the cloud automation we're going to spend a lot more time talking about. So again, at a high level, what Infoblox is really focused on is giving you those core services and adding more value on top of it. When I talk about some of the examples from VMware and what we're doing, we're leveraging that core foundation of Infoblox for serving up DNS, DHCP, and or IP addresses and adding more capabilities on top of it. In terms of deployment, where we're at, we are the market leader when it comes out to the enterprise space and service provider space for DNS, DHCP, IP address management. About 8,000 customers worldwide, about 50% market share, the key people we deal with around the world, and that's really why Infoblox and VMware are partnering up. VMware is a leader in the space of software-defined networking and cloud. Infoblox is the leader in the space from a DNS and IP address management perspective, so it makes sense to tie us together to leverage the information that we have, and we can share that and make it much easier for the different organizations to take advantage of your investments and really try to get to the true value of software-defined networking, get to that agility, get to that true automation across your organization. And the last slide kind of is an overview of Infoblox before I get into more details on what we're doing with VMware in particular and the automation. From an enterprise-grade DDI space, the big difference is we are a purpose-built platform to serve up these core network services. High availability, again, redundancy, easy to manage, hardened appliances. So I'm not using general purpose software where I'm doing patches. I'm having a very easy to manage, very manageable platform as well, where I have an integrated database for IP, DNS, DHCP, all my discovery, I can see what's happening, very simplified across my platforms. So whether I'm doing on-prem physical, whether I'm doing virtualized with vSphere, maybe I'm doing cloud, maybe I'm doing software-defined networking, doesn't matter. We can help manage all of those along the way. And then also adding a lot more capabilities dealing with things like network automation, some of the templates, some of the wizards, some of the APIs that we're pre-building for our customers are really trying to help solve some of these key problems from a DDI perspective. So a lot of times we don't think about DNS. We don't think about IP addressing because we already are doing something. You have to be doing something for your networks to work today. But really what we want to focus on is how to optimize that. If you're an existing Infoblox customer, here's a great way to get additional value. If you're using Microsoft or something else today, you can leverage us for the core services and then focus on some of the key value adds from an automation perspective. And now I'm going to drill down a little bit more detail in terms of what we are doing and handling some of these capabilities across your organization from a VMware perspective and working with VMware's VRA, VRO. vRealize orchestration, vRealize automation platforms as a way to work on the workflows. And the key thing that we are doing is we are building hooks in and building automation as part of the workflow process. So I asked you before about how are you assigning IP address or a DNS record along the way. Typically you were doing a trouble ticket, you were doing a custom script, or you had a block of addresses. Now I can actually automate that process as part of the integration between Infoblox and with VMware for the automatic allocation and deallocation of IP addresses to my virtual machines or to my NSX devices, as well as update DNS records in seconds as part of the workflow. The key thing I'm going to reinforce a couple times through this is all part of your standard workflow. Now I can make it very simple. So now my VMware admin who is used to VRO or VRA, for example, can do all this, not have to ask the networking team, not have to request it through a trouble ticket. It's all done through the attributes you set up within your organization. So the huge value of that is the server, the cloud, the VMware admin, for example, can do all this spin up, but my networking team still has control, still has visibility. They tell you what blocks of IP addresses you want to use, what should my DNS record attribute be, and it's done automatically through the workflow, through the integration. And when I walk through the demo, I'll give you an example of exactly how that works. And really what we're doing is our adapter is going to sit in between that platform, for example, vSphere or vCenter, and then working with the automation and the orchestration and the cloud management platform across your organization. So we have a plug-in or an adapter that integrates with VRA, VRO, as well as some of the other legacy orchestration and automation platforms from VMware to help you assign, provision, validate these key aspects across your organization, across your network to really help you deal with this and help you become much more effective along the way to help solve some of these challenges across your organization. And now I'm going to give you kind of a sample workflow. We're going to look at the VM right now, and I got another example coming up with an NSX device as well. But again, the key thing is from the first point of view, that VRA, or my VMware admin, is going to request that VM to be created. It's done automatically within that VMware automation interface, thing they're used to using today. and it's going to communicate via the pre-built APIs with Infoblox as a way to allocate the workflow, and everything starts to process along the way. As we see that again, so we're going to integrate within the adapter, is going to tie together with the VRO interface and the integration components behind this, and it's going to communicate back with Infoblox. We're going to communicate back with Infoblox and assign an IP address and send that to the VM along with a host record, for example, in this example here. And then finally, it's going to walk through and it's going to go back to VRA, and I'm going to spin up my VM. And with this, my newly created VM is now running at ESXi host using that newly allocated IP address and DNS record. Now, complete visibility into this. Again, the power of this is all of this is done behind the scenes. This is not doing trouble tickets. This is not doing a manual process. It's not doing a phone call. It's actually communicating with us through the APIs, getting an IP address from the block of IP addresses you want to deal with today, assigning that IP address, getting a DNS record as a way to go out and allocate, and we spin it up. Now, again, the networking team still has control. You can have all your trouble tickets and all your processes in place to verify you want to do this and you want to handle this. What it's really doing is taking away a lot of the headaches and a lot of the hiccups in terms of the manual handoff between different people. In addition, what it's going to do if I'm destroying a VM, something typically nobody ever does. Again, we typically would destroy a VM, but we never go back and clean up the IP address and DNS record. One of the nice things about the integration as well is when I go out and destroy that virtual machine, it's going to do a release workflow, again, leveraging the adapter or the plugin with Infoblox and VRA and VRO. It's going to communicate with Infoblox, release the IP address, delete the DNS host name for that virtual machine, and then the vCenter is going to go out and shut down and destroy the VM. Again, it does the cleanup as well. This is typically one of the big things that we tend to see people never do in terms of, because it just takes time, it takes effort. Or if I give somebody a block of IP addresses in a spreadsheet, they never go out and clean them up. Because why? They're busy. They're doing something else. They don't think about it. And again, different responsibilities, different priorities becomes a major headache for a lot of different organizations, and we can help automate this process. And again, the key thing here is it's all part of the workflow, leveraging Infoblox and leveraging technologies like VMware. And so we wanted to reinforce some of the key things that we've been doing. We've been partnering with VMware for probably about the past 5 or 6 years, really giving more and more solutions from an organization and a partnership point of view. So for a long time, Infoblox has worked with VMware doing traditional virtual machines and vSphere and ESXi hosts for a long time. So we've been doing that for years and years now. And in the past several releases, in the last year or so, we focused more and more on some of the NSX components. Again, we're seeing a lot of investments, a lot of integrations pulling us together, working with VMware to help solve some of these new age problems across organizations. So with our 4.0 adapter, we were focusing on an external network profile, as well as giving support for an NSX load balancer. In addition, became a first-class object integration. What that really means, being a first-class object, is it's already part of the VMware VRA VRO interface, and now we're just like another piece of it already put into it. So again, it makes it much easier to use, much easier to manage across your VMware infrastructure along the way. In our 4.2 release, we supported routing networking profiles, as well as provision an IP address for the distributed logical routers from a VMware NSX perspective. And then with 4.3, we added a NAT profile, a networking profile along the way. So now I can do more with the ESGW for both one-to-one NAT or many-to-one NATing across the organization. And if I look down towards my little graphic at the bottom, I see my networking profiles. I can pick and choose which ones do I want to do. Do I want external? Do I want NATing? Do I want routing? Again, very easy to use across the interface. And when I walk through the demo, you'll see this in a little more detail and kind of see it in action. Some of the key use cases you might want to consider. So again, we were talking about NSX quite a bit early on, but again, some of the things you can do with VMware and Infoblox today out of the box with our plugins and our adapters. I can provision one or more VMs using an external networking profile. So if I'm just on a virtual machine, maybe I'm just evaluating NSX, haven't got there yet. I can provision an NSX load balancer with 2 or more VMs maybe. Maybe I want to do a DLR with 1 or more VMs. Or I want to do some of the ESGWs along the way using NATing. I can do any one of these or multiple of these with the different integrations. So again, we've kind of added more and more capabilities over the year of things to do across your organization. So again, maybe you are just at virtual machines now and you're thinking about going to NSX. and load balancing or logical routing. Maybe you're not there yet, maybe you're fully there. Doesn't matter, Infoblox, we can help you across the board, across all those different platforms, make it much easier to help solve some of these problems and handle some of these issues from your organization. I'm going to walk through a recorded demo here coming up. I will admit it is recorded. It's a little bit easier to maintain consistency on a recorded version. And we're going to walk through some of the value and some of the integrations. And what we're going to do in this demo is we're going to focus on using some of the newer things that we are doing. So this is going to be working with the new natting, with the ESGW along the way for the edge security gateways and how we're going to solve this. I showed you a workflow before. Kind of a similar workflow, a little bit different because NSX is different than vSphere, for example. But basically, again, what's really happening is with VRA, I'm going to start spinning up that new edge security gateway. I'm going to do 2 VMs using natting with this, and it's going to communicate with the Infoblox plugin. That's going to work back with the Infoblox DDI platform, as well as when you start doing the provisioning and the spin up within VMware. So again, I'm going to show you that as part of this demo. And conversely, it's going to automatically provision the IP addresses. And then conversely, when we do the destroying, there's going to be the second part of the demo we're going to walk through. It's going to be very similar to what I talked about before. So when I start destroying it, I'm going to do this all through VMware's VRA capabilities. Our plugin is going to communicate with Infoblox, and we're going to assign this as part of the VMware's VRA, VRO platform as I start spinning up these processes. So again, there's a lot of documentation here. Don't want to go through it word by word. I want to focus more on kind of the big value behind this. Let's talk about some of the value and show you the interface in action. Because I walk through the demo, I'm going to kind of give you some high-level overviews as a way to kind of provision as well as destroy these NSX devices for edge security gateways and the VMs behind it. When the demo starts here, again, we'll share this with you. You have a copy of this after today's presentation and get more details on this. But now I'm going to look at my VMware vRealize automation integration, and I'm going to start my process for assigning the ESGWs. I'll set my description up. I'm going to start my request along the way within my service catalog. And now I'm just clicking through to show you some of the processes to show you how vRealize automation automatically starts executing these processes and starts allocating the workflows and working with Infoblox. So starting the process behind the scenes, I showed you a quick interface of Infoblox with the IP addressing where the IP address was being allocated as part of the process. So communicated with Infoblox, got an IP address, and now when I come back into VRO and VRA, it's going to assign that IP address and continuing walking through the orchestration component. Now I can see the IP address being provisioned as part of the workflow, as part of my virtual machine on this natting scenario. Again, lots of key things happen behind the scenes as I'm dealing with this. And with Infoblox, I can track exactly what's happening. So now I have a complete new network view. I can treat this automatically. Again, this is the power behind all this automation. Is it's done automatically. I have all my metadata. It's going to collect all my sensible attributes, populate as part of the workflow. So it's not manual. It's not doing this, one by one as I do along the way. It's done as part of the orchestration workflow. And I have all this rich, detailed information along the way. So I can look at my network views, look at my different VMs within that network view, for example, and see what's happening. What's my IP address? What's my attribute tied to it? My metadata can show that it was collected from VRA. It gives you all this rich, detailed data as part of the workflow. Again, the network corresponding to the VRA attributes, it's going to give me the reservations. It's going to assign everything I need across my organization. And it's going to be my metadata for the edge gateway as well now in terms of NIOS, my sensible attribute. It's going to populate that as part of the workflow. So I go back to vRealize automation. I can see it's in process. I can see what's happening. I can see my new virtual machines are being spun up along the way. The plugins added that NIOS reservation and the MAC address for these new services as part of the vRealize automation workflow. I can also go to my vSphere web client and just make sure everything's working properly, to make sure my edge gateway host, the VM instances are being provisioned as part of the request and make sure they're available. I can also go out and just ping it and make sure everything's working. I can connect to it, make sure my DNS record, my IP address are assigned along the way, just to make sure I prove to you that I have an IP address, I have a DNS record as part of the process. In addition, we're going to go out and discover everything coming across your organization, your cloud platform. So I can go out to my cloud platform and see all the different VMs deployed from a tenant point of view. I can see the network and NIOS, my one-to-many NAT, my on-demand networking, and I have all this information tied very quickly, very easily, again, as part of my attributes and see what's happening. Again, now with Infoblox, I can track all this information. I have all this great metadata across all these different virtual networks, again, as part of the orchestration workflow. So we start thinking about some of the challenges here. I have that direct view of the information. I can drill down into my IPAM data. I can look at a list. I can look at an IP address mapping capability with my IP map and see what's used. I can click on that. Now I can see, for example, there's that VM I just created for my NSX capabilities. It all tracked very easily, very automatically through the Infoblox platform to make it much easier throughout the integration, throughout the orchestration components. In addition to my VMware capabilities, I can view everything along the way and have my filters so I can start matching data as I want. If I want to go out and start matching data, I have different views. I have all this information, again, automatically populated as part of this process to make it a little bit easier across your organization. And as I mentioned before, one of the key things about this is kind of the automation from a cleanup perspective. So if I want to go back and destroy this, we're going to do this all part of VRA. You're going to see a very similar workflow coming back from a destroy point of view. But again, we're going to track all this information. We're going to destroy it. We're going to see the workflow starting in the process. It's going to communicate back with Infoblox as well to destroy the IP address, to release the IP address, to document that with this. And again, as I go to my vSphere client, I can see everything happening kind of in the background where it's going to start destroying and we're going to see them start going away within my organization. And if vRealize automation, I can see this again, that workflow. So I can see my release workflow has been triggered, that VMware has been deleted, VM has been deleted. And this also goes back to Infoblox as a way to track all this and to release the IP address. So again, the key value behind a lot of this is when I start releasing this workflow, it's going to communicate with us. It's going to release the VMs. It's going to release the NSX Edge Security Gateway. It's going to delete the IP address ranges along the way and clean it up. And then when I go back to my Infoblox view, you're going to see all of a sudden, when I refresh it, it's gone. So I cleaned it up. It's automatically released. It's automatically handled across my organization, and it's done within the capabilities. I have a complete audit log to record everything that's happened as part of the cleanup process. So I have all that great documentation as well. And within this, and again, everything I saw within VMware's VRA, it's gone as well. So I know I went through that very quickly and kind of, at a quick level. We're going to spend a few minutes kind of showing the interface and how it works. Really the key thing you want to think about when you're dealing with that and how I showed that example was that was all done with a single click of the button up front from VRA and VRO within VMware's perspective. Everything else that we showed you as part of the automation and kind of clicking back and forth between VRA, vSphere and Infoblox, that was just showing you what was happening behind the scenes. Again, as I start spinning up a new virtual machine, for example, it grabbed an IP address from Infoblox and a subnet range you wanted, it automatically populated it for you. It gave you a network view. All the defensible attributes were already pre-populated for you. That's the value. When you think about how you deal with that on a manual process, that's a very manual process. I have to go into Infoblox, for example, get an IP address. What are my attributes? I got to type those in. I got to take that back, copy and paste that into VMware to do it manually or to do as part of the workflow process. That becomes very tedious, very time-consuming, and does get out of date very quickly. This becomes a much more elegant, much easier way to do this. Again, that was a quick high-level overview of a demo walking through this. We do have other technical content you can download here. So I want to see an NSX load balancer. You can see a very similar demo of what we're doing with the load balancer, as well as what we're doing with the VM. In addition, talk about the plugin and how you configure that with VRA 7.1 and give you some more details on demystifying some of the networking profiles. But we have a lot of technical content out there from a demo perspective that you can see more and more details and how you can help reduce some of these pain points across your organization. And one of the key things that we tend to see is, it tends to make sense. If I automate some of these key processes, it tends to save time, tends to save effort. We did a study with Tully Group actually measuring it between automation and doing it manually. And you can see there's huge time savings from provisioning, tracking, inventorying, destroying, provisioning along the way by automating this. And these numbers are fairly large, and this is actually making a very big assumption. A very conservative assumption is I have the right person with the right expertise at the right time to do it when I need it. This is assuming everything is working properly with no delays along the way. But in reality, we tend to have more delays of waiting for the right person with the right expertise across an organization. So there are some huge time and cost savings across the way. I have some time here for Q&A, but I do want to give you some of the technical resources. And again, we'll share this presentation with you, but we have a couple of solution briefs available, both with joint ones with Infoblox and VMware, as well as some VMware white papers and solution notes on what we're doing from a cloud and network environment. Feel free to download those and a little bit more about some of the key details. In addition, we have a new deployment guide for dealing with VRA 7.3. So you can go to infoblox.com in our resources section and download this, and this gives you complete information on how to deploy this across my current customers and what you're doing today for VMware and Infoblox. Two other things if you want to get more hands-on. We have two ways you can do this. We did a hands-on lab with VMware last year at VMworld. This is available to everybody today. I can go out and see what's happening with plugin 4.2 and VRA 7.2. There's the link and the class. I can go out and try this and see exactly what's happening and do the hands-on lab myself. Again, this is available free of charge. You just have to create an account, free account, and you can download this with all the instructions to really see exactly what's happening. In addition, again, being a key partner of VMware, we're going to do a new hands-on lab at VMworld 2017 coming up in Barcelona and Las Vegas. This is going to add an update to our newest plugin and VRA's newest release of 7.3. This is not available to the public yet. It'll be coming out in early October. If you're going to be at VMworld, you can sign up. You can do it on site without a problem, either in Barcelona or Vegas. If you're not going to be there in October of 2017, you can come back and do this hands-on lab as well. To be perfectly honest, they're going to be very similar workflows. It's just showing some of the new things that we're doing with natting and 7.3. But again, very similar workflows, very similar value. You can really get some hands-on experience very easily, very quickly across your organization, see how it might deploy within your organization today. In terms of Infoblox, what we're trying to focus on, we're just trying to help take some of that core DDI value, DNS, DHCP, IP address management, and extend it out to cloud, to software-defined networking, to data center 2.0 by leveraging automation, talking about improving agility and time to deploy. Multi-platforms. They've been focusing on VMware. The vast majority of people are doing multiple platforms, both on-prem, private cloud, public cloud, maybe VMware, maybe other folks out there. Doesn't matter to us. We build in hooks and integrations across multiple platforms so I can have consistency across my enterprise. Again, whether it's on-prem, public, or private, doesn't matter, as well as having visibility. Keep track of everything that's happening across my organization, track all those assets very quickly, very easily, all on a single IPAM database, really giving you much more value along the way. And then some next steps, my Infoblox customers, if you want, you can go out there and download the VMware adapter as well as the cloud network automation software license for a trial, see what it does, play it a little bit, see the visibility you can have into it to really get some more value across your organization. If you're not an Infoblox customer today, you can download our complete Infoblox DDI demo and try it on your network, and you can plug in some of the new VMware and some of the cloud capabilities. So again, you can try it yourself if you want. If you want a little bit more engagement and work with Infoblox and kind of work with you one-on-one, engage with us to discuss what you're doing in VMware, in your cloud deployments, and we can come out and work with you for an individual demo or a POC in your environment. So depending on where you are, if you want to learn yourself or you want to get some more hands-on capabilities, you need to do some trials or softwares, or I highly recommend involving Infoblox because we can work with you, see what you're trying to do, see what value you're trying to provide, and help you solve some of these problems across your organization. And that's going to cover what I wanted to handle from kind of an organizational perspective along the way in terms of Infoblox and VMware. Some time for Q&A here. I'm going to take a second here and we have a bunch of questions coming in. Fantastic. Answer some of these questions as we come up. As we start talking about, one of the questions came up asking about, does VMware's VRA or VRO have its own addressing tools? And now there is a way you can actually assign a few addresses or give a block of addresses to VRA or VRO, and it'll assign that IP address. But one of the key things about that is typically it's almost like a spreadsheet, the same kind of thing. You're just putting that into VRA. You don't have the visibility. If it's destroyed, you're not tracking it. It doesn't go into the IPAM database. So again, some of the key things you want to think about is when I'm dealing with some of these issues and I want to handle this, You want to get more automation, you want to get more orchestration as you deal with some of these things to handle this. And again, with those plugins and with those adapters, we can actually solve some of those problems for you and make it a little bit easier across the automation capability. Somebody else came back and asked about is if we're not using VRA or VRO, does this work? Really what we've done with the VRA, VRO is we've built the API plugin automatically for you. So a very common use case, very simple to deploy across your organization. We have the ability to do that through VRA, VRO. If you're not using VRA or VRO, you're doing something else, you're building your own custom ones, you're using another platform, we have the inbound and outbound APIs. So you want to be able to leverage that so we can actually go out there and build your custom APIs as a way to have more automation, to more orchestration along the way as well. So again, one of the nice things about it is we pre-built the very common ones to handle some of this, and then we've added the ability to become more flexible. So again, if you're doing something like, you're doing Clicker or you're doing Service Mesh or HA or, CA or some of the other orchestrations, we can also plug in those capabilities as well within your organization. Question coming in was asked about for allocating IP addresses. Is the API required? I kind of mentioned that a second ago. We pre-built the APIs as part of the workflows working with VRA, VRO. So that's what the adapter does. It has those API hooks built in automatically. So they're pre-approved, pre-tested. We document them, everything else. So I can do that very easily along the way. But again, if you want any other kind of customization, you can do that yourself as well. And you can leverage the APIs to add a little bit more based on your organization. Question coming in from Gerald was, does the VRO adapter have a cost? One of the great things about the adapter and the integration is we are tied, there's no cost to it. It's something we built with VMware and we tested with VMware. I can add the adapter as part of my organization. I saw another question come up talking about different interfaces and different versions of code. There are some different versions of code, what you're trying to do. So I through some of the newer things that we were doing, we've added new capabilities along the way. So you do need to match what version of code you're running with Infoblox as well as with VMware. As long as those codes match, you can add the adapter free of charge. We do have a cloud network automation license, which gives you more visibility, not only into VMware, but other virtual assets across your organization, whether it's public or private cloud, with things like OpenStack or AWS or Azure, for example. We can discover those as well as part of a cloud network automation license. Question asked about kind of why are we dealing with some of these things with Infoblox and VMware? Why are we partnering? I think kind of the key thing is why we're focusing on IP address and DNS records from an organizational point of view is we're trying to solve one of the common problems. When we talk about some of the issues that we see across an organization trying to automate these processes, the network of an IP address and a DNS record is a very tedious, very manual process that tends to cause a lot of problems, and we're trying to reduce some of those aspects. Question coming up about allocation and deallocation. So assuming you're using an IP address and I released it, and then I want to use the IP address again, how do I have this information? One of the great things about Infoblox and all the historical reporting we do have is we can go out there and see exactly what's going on. We can track both current as well as historical ones, so I can see what was happening over time as well. So again, what's one of the nice things about provisioning as well as destroying, I have this capability to have the visibility of what's happening across my infrastructure, both currently as well as historically. Question coming in about users having limited access based on individual networks or zones. They might only have read access, or they might only be able to see a certain part of the network. Is there a way to make this plugin work some of these capabilities as well? Looks like they might have tried it themselves. There should be ways of doing it. I probably recommend reaching out to your Infoblox rep or our support team. If you're an Infoblox customer, we can get into more details for it. One of the nice things about this typically is I can assign visibility. I can have role-based access rights to help me reduce some of these pain points. But if you have a very specific question on what you're doing in your example, in your workflow as an Infoblox customer, I recommend reaching out to us or our support team and see what you're doing and see if there's a fit along the way. Generic question asked about what does VRA, VRO stand for. I apologize. I used that probably several times throughout. That stands for vRealize Automation or vRealize Orchestrator. That's the automation orchestration platforms within VMware. So we have adapted with those, working with those as part of our workflows in the organization. Question coming in asking about, can't we just use VRO to do most of this? VRO is free for most VMware customers. Why would I want to consider doing something else and using Infoblox? The key thing about the VRO and the VRA, very powerful orchestration component, but it doesn't have all the history and the IP addressing and the DNS details that Infoblox can have and provide. And the key thing about it is, well, VRA does a fantastic job of spinning up all the VMware components by tying back with Infoblox and getting the IP address, getting the DNS record, having the ability to set up what subnet zones I want to pull addresses from, whether it's based on geography, whether it's based by application type, having that long-term tracking over time, having a consistent view across not only my NSX or my VM, but my on-prem solutions. Those are key reasons why you want to consider why people are using Infoblox as a way to solve this via working with just orchestration automation. Really what we see this happening from an organization is people using automation orchestration are trying to get more agile, trying to take out the steps, trying to take out the manual processes or handoffs. And what Infoblox is doing is we're doing that component from an IP address and a DNS record from provisioning, as well as DNS record provisioning as well. Question coming in is if a new subnet is created in VRO, will we create an Infoblox automatically as well? Yes, that's the key value prop. So basically when I start spinning it up, I'm going to get an IP address, going to create a subnet or network view as part of the capabilities. That's going to be part of it. Infoblox will give you the IP address from where you want to put it on based on your parameters, and then we're going to track it going forward as well. So again, that's one of the key value adds I tried to cover in a quick demo, but again, everything is done kind of automatically as part of the orchestration. So if you remember the demo, when I showed you some of the Infoblox screens, I showed you subnets and network views and IP addresses populating. That was done automatically as part of the workflow. So it gives me really some great capabilities to solve some of those organizations and solve some of those problems that we see from a VMware perspective. Are the workflows actions package used for VRO demo available to download? Yes, they are. So again, we'll send you a copy of today's presentation. You can download all this on our resources tab. All the adapters are out there. There's a deployment guide out there, as well as some very good demos, both giving you kind of a high-level value prop capability, as well as very technical how to install capabilities. They're all part of the packages. They're all part of the available today along the way. Got a lot of questions here. I apologize. I'm trying to go through them as quickly as possible. Question asking about, I see address tracking with Infoblox, but how or where does the logging or tracking occur? Within Infoblox or using a separate syslog server? The value, again, is it's the integration that we're doing within Infoblox, tying it with VMware, in this example, with VRA or VRO. So when we start communicating back and forth, when I'm going to provision or release an IP address, for example, that's how we're identifying it, that's how we're installing it, that's how we're tracking it as well. So we can see exactly what's happening as part of the workflow as I deal with this. Is Infoblox able to provision a third-party service VMs, such as some other vendors listed here? Yes. Again, VMware is a great partner of ours, a market leader in this space from both a cloud as well as virtualization perspective, but we do know that people are using VMs across other platforms. We have pre-built integrations and adapters with VMware, with OpenStack, as well as integrations with things like Docker, AWS, and Azure. But again, you can also either use the APIs to customize these based on your organization. So whether it's another VM or if it's another orchestration platform kind of across the organization, we can leverage with those as part of the APIs as well. Question coming in, can I specify which address range within a network segment is available assigned to the host? Yes, you can. Again, that's one of the great things about this is this gives me the ability to assign subnet ranges where I want to start assigning them from. So again, as a networking team, you have control of where they're going, what they should look like, where you want to pull them from. The orchestration's coming in, grabbing it, and pulling it back out as a way to automate that process. But again, you do have that flexibility as part of the pre-built integrations that we do have with VMware. We ran up to our hour time frame. I try to stay within the hour time frame because I know your time is very valuable. I answered a lot of different questions there. If I did miss your question, I apologize. We'll take a look at all these questions. We'll reach out to you afterwards. If you have any other further questions, feel free to reach out to your Infoblox rep or when you get your email coming back with the thread, you can reach out to us and we get some more details to you. If you're an existing customer, I highly recommend talking to your Infoblox rep or partners that you're dealing with or support and seeing what you're doing and what we can do to help solve your problems. I want to thank Simon and VMware very much for helping us host this presentation and walk through some of the key things you're seeing with an NSX perspective, as well as software-defined networking and data center 2.0, and walking through some of the value that we're doing from an automation perspective, from an IP address and DNS record provisioning as part of orchestration and automation. I want to thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar. At this time, today's webinar is now concluded.